संस्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतारवरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः. Mind control made easy. A very interesting subject. And gradually you will know that it is not very interesting after all. I am reminded of a very interesting story which appeared in the well-known magazine Koravanji long back. One famous wrestler announced one day that he would carry the Chamundi Hills on his head. And he even announced a particular day and time, and naturally on that day a very large number of people had gathered at the foot of the hill. And he also came, sat majestically on a stone bench nearby, and was just trying to show his muscle power, but nothing happened. Then some of the people who had gathered there, they went up to him and asked him, "Sir, you declared that you would carry the Chamundi Hills on your head, but how is it that you are simply sitting quiet?" He said, "Yes, I am also waiting for the same thing. Please lift it up and keep it on my head. The moment you lift it up and keep it on my head, I will start carrying it." So, mind control made easy is also like that. You first start controlling your mind, then, if necessary, I will try to show you some easy methods based upon the great work, the Yoga Darshana of Patanjali. We have an incident recorded in the life of Swami Vivekananda, which was told to us by one of our Swamijis. Of course, this is not actually recorded in the official biographies. It seems Swamiji was once talking in England, and he used the word Hindu psychology. So one Englishman from the audience stood up and asked the Swami, "Does Hinduism have a psychology at all?" Immediately Swamiji replied, "Yes, Hinduism does have a psychology. Whereas your psychology deals with sick and abnormal minds, my psychology deals with healthy and supernormal minds." And he took this as a challenge and started classes on the Raja Yoga, on the Sutras of Patanjali, which writing has now been published as a book. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali is the basic text for yoga philosophy, for the philosophy of controlling the mind. There is a well-known commentary by Vyasa. None of these works, which is in the sutra form, aphoristic form, can be easily understood without the help of a standard commentary, normally known as Bhashya. For instance, the Brahma Sutras. It is impossible to understand it without the detailed commentary offered to us by Bhagavan Shankara. That is the earliest commentary, and a commentary which is very, very lucid, very clear. In the same way, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali also has a commentary by one Vyasa. It's called Vyasa Bhashya. We do not know who that Vyasa is. There, in the very beginning, he compares the science of health, Ayurveda, with the science of mind. In Ayurveda, 4 topics are generally dealt with. The first is called Roga, disease, various types and kinds of disease. The second is called Roga Hetu. What is it that causes disease? Third is Arogya. Suppose the disease is removed or cured. How does a man feel? What does health mean? How to recognize the signs of health? And lastly, the most important point, Bhaishajya, various means and methods of curing the disease and regaining health. Vyasa applies the same principles to the yoga philosophy or the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Heyam dukkham anagatam. All of us are suffering. There is so much of suffering in our life, both at the physical level and at the mental level. So that is the first statement. And this dukkha has to be given up. We don't want it. None of us wants to suffer, and that too for a long time. Then you have to find out what has caused this dukkha. Dukkha hetu. He says, drashtru drishyayoho samyogo heya hetuhu. What is to be given up is dukkha, and what causes dukkha is the identification of the seer and the seen. The seer is the Atman, the Purusha. The seen is Prakriti. Ultimately it comes to this body-mind complex. When the Purusha or the individual soul or self wrongly identifies himself with the body-mind complex, then all his troubles will start. Tasya hetuhu avidya. The cause for this is ignorance of his own real nature. Because all these principles are adopted by Vedanta also. Tad abhavat samyoga abhavaha hanam tad drishehe kaivalyam. So when this avidya is destroyed, then the identification of the soul with the body is also destroyed, and automatically kaivalya or liberation is attained. And what is it that gives us kaivalya? Vivekakhyatihi aviplava hanopayaha. So knowledge that we are separate from the body-mind complex. I am the spirit, this is dead nature. I am different from that, I am completely different from that, wrongly identified with it. So once this knowledge comes, automatically the realization also comes, experience comes. Then coming to the word yoga, the scholars have discovered that it is a very, very ancient science, and we see its reflections even in the Rig Veda. Yunjate mana uta yunjate dhiyo vipraha. Vipraha, the wise people, they unite their minds upon God, they meditate upon God, and through that they are able to get joy, happiness, peace, bliss and liberation. In the Upanishads also, we find this word yoga repeated quite a few times. Tam yogamiti manyante sthiram indriya dharanam. Kathopanishad, a very beautiful Upanishad which is much easier to understand compared to the others. It says, Tam yogamiti manyante sthiram indriya dharanam. When we are able to control all the sense organs and make them steady and dissolve them into the mind, and the mind is made to concentrate upon the Atman within, that is called yoga. And what is the purpose or the utility of yoga? Adhyatma yoga dhigamena devam matva dhiraha harsha shokau jahati. A wise man, a man of knowledge and wisdom, practices Adhyatma yoga. That is, the mind which is going out, he turns it backwards towards his own mind and heart. Inside the heart, where the Supreme Lord is dwelling, towards that the mind is directed, and once the mind is able to realize the Supreme Lord inside, he will be able to give up all dualities that cause us suffering in this life. Harsha shokau jahati. The Shvetashvatara Upanishad is also equally important as the other 10 Upanishads. It starts with a very interesting incident. A number of rishis have gathered in a forest, probably a forest retreat. They have started discussing about the origin of the universe. What is the origin of the universe? How was this world created? By whom? When? What for? They went on discussing and discussing, talking and talking, each one of the sages giving his own answer to the question, which was again opposed by others, and there was no definite conclusion at all. Then they decided, this is something which cannot be decided through the intellect. Let us retire and try to meditate. So they all went back to their ashrams and started meditating. Te dhyana yoga anugataha apashyan devatma shaktim swagunair nigudham. So they took to the method of the dhyana yoga and ultimately discovered that there is one supreme power hidden in the heart of the Supreme Being, using which he creates Parabrahman and Parashakti. So we see the word Dhyana Yoga in Shvetashvatara Upanishad. And in this Upanishad, there is also mention of some of the asanas and pranayamas for the first time. The Upanishadic literature has grown over the centuries, and today among the printed Upanishads we can recognize 20 Upanishads, minor Upanishads, classified as Yoga-Upanishads. All of them deal with the yoga philosophy and the techniques of yoga in great detail. Now the question comes, who is the author of this yoga system? Who discovered it? Who taught it to the world for the first time? In Hindu religion and philosophy, we come across a particular idea that every art and science in this world has originated from God Himself. There are many things which we see today, they are almost in the stage of final perfection. It is not possible for any human being to produce such a perfect science. Originally it must have come from the Lord Himself, either Hiranyagarbha, Chaturmukha Brahman, or Shiva, or Vishnu, or Narayana, or Naranarayana, and so on. And in course of time, probably the science was partially lost or completely lost. Again it was revived by another great sage who rediscovered it in the depths of his meditation. That is how these topics are generally discussed, and according to this view, Hiranyagarbha or Chaturmukha Brahma is the creator of this Yoga Shastra. And the Mahabharata says that Sanat Kumara, one of the four sages considered mind-born son of Brahman, is the discoverer or the original teacher of the Yoga Sutras. But as we have it today, it is attributed to Patanjali. There are two ways of explaining this. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali may be the original creation of the sage called Patanjali. Or alternatively, Patanjali may be a great teacher who has come in the tradition of yoga. He has collected all the material available to him during his time, and then he has put it in the form of this work. Because in the olden days, all the sciences used to be memorized. So it's quite likely that Patanjali was only a teacher coming in the tradition. He had for the first time probably recorded them in the form of this sutra. Tradition says that Patanjali was actually the incarnation of Adishesha. It is said that Adishesha used to dictate the sutras and his disciples used to take it down in writing. That is, Patanjali used to dictate the sutras and then his disciples used to take them down. But it seems he used to insist that a screen had to be put in front of him, separating him from the disciples. They should not see him, they should not look at him. And one day, out of curiosity, one of the disciples just pushed the screen a little aside, and then he was surprised to see Adishesha himself there. This is the story, of course, just to prove that he was the avatar of Adishesha. And this sage Patanjali was so wise and so great that he gave 3 types of sciences for the betterment of humanity. One, the Ayurveda, the science concerning the body, how to keep the body free from all diseases, how to keep it healthy and strong. The second one, the science of speech. Unless your speech is good, very powerful, you will not be able to spread any knowledge to others. Apart from communication amongst ourselves, the organ of speech is also necessary to spread any field of knowledge. And the third is the science, art and science of controlling the mind, ultimately leading to realization, moksha. So there is one very famous shloka which reflects this idea. Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya tu vaidyakena yopakarottam pravaram muninam patanjalim pranjalihi anatosmi. That Patanjali, the great sage, he helped us to wash off all the impurities of the body through a work on Yoga Shastra, on Vaidya Shastra, and the impurity of speech through a work on the science of speaking or grammar, and also the impurities of the mind to be destroyed through the science of yoga, which deals with the control of the mind. When Swamiji wrote the work on Raja Yoga, he perhaps had only 2 commentaries with him. The Vyasa Bhashya, which is the fundamental commentary upon which all the other commentators depend. The second one is the Raja Martanda Vritti of Bhojadeva, probably a work of the 11th century. It's a very beautiful commentary. It has been printed, the whole text has been printed with Hindi translation. Nobody has done the English or Kannada translation till today. But it's a very, very clear commentary, and Swamiji probably got these 2 commentaries because he often refers to these commentaries. But we have quite a good number of Sanskrit commentaries on the Yoga Sutras. Perhaps they have been discovered later on and printed. Quite a large number of them are there. Vachaspati's Tattva Vaisharadi, then Pradipika of Bhava Ganesha, and so on. But one of the most recent commentaries is by Sadashiva Brahmendrayati, called Yoga Sudhakara, 19th century work. He was himself a very great yogi. He was attracted by the Yoga Shastra of Patanjali, and his commentary is very simple, very lucid and very attractive. That also has been printed, but as I said, without any translation till now. Then coming to the work itself, there are 195 sutras divided into 4 chapters. They are called padas. Samadhi pada, sadhana pada, vibhuti pada and kaivalya pada. We should understand why our ancient teachers have composed these sutras. In the olden days, there was no regular writing or the printing press as we have today. So everything had to be memorized. So the Guru used to give the teaching in the form of a short sutra, a mnemonic statement, explain its meaning, then there would be discussion, questions and answers, and then doubts and misgivings, and they are replied. Like that the discussion would go on upon one sutra, maybe for 1 week, for 15 days. Then the second, then the third. So, memorizing these sutras was very easy because only one sutra was taken up for study for 8 to 10 days or 15 days. And all the material connected with that would be stored in the mind, in memory. And later on, the teachers who came in that parampara tradition, they wrote detailed commentaries to preserve that knowledge. It is in this form, in this way, that we have today a good number of works on the ancient sciences in the form of sutras. We have such works on, this is on psychology of course, other branches of philosophy, then Ayurveda, Charaka, Sushruta and so on. Almost all these works are in the form of sutras. And the standard commentaries are there which come in that particular tradition. Therefore, if you want to understand the true meaning of these sutras, we have to take recourse to the study of these commentaries. Bhagavan Shankara says in one place, Asampradayavit sarvashastravit api murkhavat upekshaniyaha. A man may be a walking encyclopedia, but if he does not know the tradition, if he has not studied a particular science, sitting at the feet of a guru in the traditional way, he should be considered as a fool. This is where the traditional commentators and the European scholars have differed. Very often the European scholars, though they were scholars, had a good knowledge of Sanskrit, their interpretations of the scriptures, especially the Vedas, would very often go off the mark because they did not know the tradition. Sayana Bhashya is the nearest to the Vedic tradition. Therefore, today it is impossible to understand the Rig Veda without Sayana's commentary. Similarly, other branches of the Vedas, the Upanishads and so on. So we have the Sutras of Patanjali with Vyasa Bhashya and further commentaries on the same, by studying which we can understand the science of yoga very well. He has divided this work into 4 sections. The first is called Samadhipada. Samadhi is perfect concentration leading to superconscious experience. All the details connected with Samadhi are there. The second chapter deals with sadhana, the various means and methods, steps that lead to the realization in the form of samadhi. Third is Vibhuti-pada, the special psychic powers one develops by practicing yoga, by attaining or fulfilling the goals set before him by yoga. And lastly, Kaivalya-pada, attaining liberation from the bondage of samsara. In fact, the very purpose of the work is to get Kaivalya. But incidentally, other things are also explained in great detail. Another peculiar feature of our ancient tradition is to determine who is the adhikari for a particular science, who is competent to study a particular science. Any and everybody cannot take to the study of any and every science. There must be some basic qualification because of which only he becomes fit for the study of that particular science. Suppose you go to a place where there are some electrical machineries, and in one place there is a board, danger 440 volts. So naturally you don't dare to enter inside. But the engineer working in that place, he enters into that place so many times and comes back alive. Nothing happens to him, though it is called danger 440 volts. So what does it mean? It means there is danger to a person who is ignorant of the states of affairs. And if he knows how to handle it, then he is safe. Similarly, in the case of the sciences also, if you want to study a particular science or particular art, you must have certain basic qualifications. As far as this Yoga Shastra is concerned, our teachers have been very, very generous. Everybody has the right to study yoga, to control the mind and ultimately get liberation. Shanti Parva in the Mahabharata says, Api Varnava Krishtastu Nariva Dharma Kankshini Tavapyetena Margena Gachetam Paramam Gatim. Irrespective of the Varna or caste system to which a person belongs, and even women, if they are deeply interested in God realization, in moksha, they are fit to practice yoga. When you go through the Bhagavad Gita, especially the 6th chapter, it is called Dhyana Yoga, as you know, we find a lot of similarities between the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali and the Bhagavad Gita itself. Yogaha chitta vritti nirodhaha. So Patanjali defines yoga as suppression, control of all the modifications of the mind. And the Lord says in the Gita, Yatro paramate chittam niruddham yoga sevaya. So one who takes to the practice of yoga is able to make the mind absolutely calm and steady. So making the mind calm and steady without vibrations, that itself is yoga. Or by practicing yoga, one can get peace of mind. Then the second point, sthira sukham asanam. Asanam or yogic posture is that posture in which you can sit comfortably for a long time. Sthira sukham asanam. And in the 6th chapter the Lord says, Shuchau deshe pratisthapya sthiram asanam atmanaha. If you want to meditate, first of all you have to find out a very clean place. And once you select it, you have to spread your asana and sit there absolutely steady without moving your limbs. Samam kaya shirogrivam, keeping the backbone and the head and the neck erect in the same straight line. Abhyasa vairagyabhyam tannirodhaha. It's very difficult to control the mind, but Patanjali says it is not impossible, though it is difficult. It can be done through abhyasa and vairagya. The same is given by the Gita also. Abhyasena tu kaunteya vairagyena cha grihyate. In this ashram, we have been conducting spiritual retreats, adhyatmika shibiras over many years. And in each of these shibiras, we have a question and answer session, and one of the questions that comes up very frequently is, I cannot concentrate my mind. How to concentrate the mind? The mind is very fickle, running here and there. So, I would like to say here that is not a problem of only you and myself. It was the problem of Arjuna also, who put the same question to Lord Krishna 5,000 years back. So the problem continues even today, and the solution that the Lord has given, the solution that Patanjali has given, holds good even today. Abhyasa and Vairagya, they are the means by which the mind can be controlled. Asamshayam mahabaho mano durnigraham chalam. There is no doubt that it is very difficult to control the mind, which is constantly and continuously jumping about. But it can be done. It is difficult, but it is not impossible. Then coming to the philosophical background, the Sankhya and the Yoga practically accept the same philosophical principles, the only difference being in Sankhya there is no Ishvara, God is not accepted, whereas in Yoga Ishvara or God is accepted. That is why sometimes the Sankhya philosophy is called as Nirishvara Sankhya and Yoga philosophy is called Seshvara Sankhya. And Ramanuja's philosophy is very, very close to the Yoga philosophy of Patanjali. We need not go into the details of the Sankhya philosophy. We have already heard of it many times. Then coming to the nature of mind as described in the Yoga Shastra. Yoga Sutras calls the mind as Chitta. Of course in Vedanta also, the totality of the mind is called as Antahkarana. Manobuddhya ahankara chittani naham, Shankara says in one of the famous stotras. Manas, buddhi, ahankara and chitta. Chitta is the general name for the mind stuff. Manas is the general thinking. Buddhi is the determinative faculty. And ahankara is the ego sense. But all these four are different aspects of functioning of one and the same material called chitta or the mind. So this chitta or the mind is constantly rising in the form of vrittis or waves. Swami Vivekananda gives a very beautiful example in his lectures on the Raj Yoga. 6 lessons on the Raj Yoga, for instance. He compares the mind to a lake. Suppose the water of the lake is absolutely calm and steady. There is not even a ripple. Then when you look into it, you are able to see the reflection of your face beautifully. Suppose at the bottom of the lake there is a 1 rupee coin, you are able to see that because the water is so clear. Suppose somebody throws a stone into it, or there is a powerful gust of wind, then waves will rise. When the waves rise on the surface of the water, you cannot see your face very clearly. Even if you see, it will be a distorted form, not what it actually is. And much less you will not be able to see what is at the bottom of the lake. This is the example that Swamiji gives. So if you are able to make the mind absolutely calm and steady, without even a single wave or ripple or vritti of the mind, automatically we are able to see the Atman who is behind the mind. Kenopanishad says, by what, impelled by what does the mind work? It is the Atman principle. So, Patanjali uses this, says there are chitta vrittis, the mind is constantly rising in the form of waves, and yoga is chitta vritti nirodha, controlling, suppressing these modifications and making the mind absolutely calm and steady. Incidentally, there is a word used in some of these philosophical works, manonasha, especially Vedantic works. Manonasha does not mean destroying the mind, because if the mind is destroyed, we cannot live, or we'll have to go to the Nimhans. Manonasha simply means the destruction of the tendency in the mind to rise in the form of waves without our control over it. Now, as it is, we have no control over the mind because of the samskaras of the previous lives, tendencies, the mind is running riot. But when yoga is attained, mind will be absolutely calm and quiet. It cannot rise in the form of waves by itself. But the yogi has full control over it. If he wants, he uses the mind and through that thinks whatever he wants. So, manonasha simply means the destruction of the tendency of the mind to rise in the form of waves by itself, impelled by the old samskaras. Then Patanjali takes up one question. You say yoga is chittavritti nirodha, controlling the modifications of the mind. But we find that the mind is rising in the form of hundreds of thousands of waves. How to control? It is impossible. Then Patanjali says, yes, it appears that the mind is rising in the form of millions of waves, but if you categorize them, it can be grouped into 5 groups, 5 categories. Pramana, Viparyaya, Vikalpa, Nidra and Smriti. These are 5 categories. Now Pramana, you get a knowledge by using the mind. pratyaksha, anumana and so on. I see something, I say such and such an object is there. I hear some news, then I think, oh, maybe this is the reason for that conclusion and so on. Viparyaya is wrong thinking. I see a rope in semi-darkness, mistake it for a snake. The famous example given by the Advaitins. Then vikalpa. There is no object, real object, but I hear something, I imagine that there is an object behind it. This famous example given is the head of Rahu. Actually, Rahu is only head, there is nothing else. But the moment we hear the word the head of Rahu, we imagine that Rahu is an animal which has got a head also. So, Shabda Jnana Anupati Vastu Shunyo Vikalpaha, that is how Patanjali puts it. You hear something and you imagine the meaning. Then there is Nidra, deep sleep state. And then Smriti, remembering something which has happened earlier. You remember either the whole thing or part of it, but you should not add something which was not there. Then it will not become Smriti. So this is the way that the waves of the mind can be classified into 5 groups. There is also another way of dividing these chitta vrittis, klishta and aklishta. Klishta, those chitta vrittis which cause bondage in the spiritual sense, and those chitta vrittis which help us to get liberation. Klishta vrittis are the normal waves of the mind which cause a lot of problems and trouble to us. Aklishta vrittis are the waves or modifications that rise in the mind as a result of studying the Shastras, listening to the teachings of the Gurus, and using our discriminative power to get over ignorance. Then coming to the kleshas, or what causes us harm or trouble or suffering in the mind, Patanjali has divided them into 5 groups. Avidya, ignorance. Asmita, ego sense. That is also something which binds us. Then raga and dvesha, attachment and aversion. Then abhinivesha. Abhinivesha is clinging to life. Patanjali uses this word, and in the Vyasa Bhashya he goes to the extent of telling, even in the case of a very highly evolved spiritual soul, a trace of abhinivesha is there, which is there as an obstacle to spiritual life. Clinging to life, attachment to life. I don't want to die, I want to live. That clinging to life is also a great bondage. So abhinivesha is put in the end, and that is the subtlest but the most difficult bond which has to be transcended one day or the other. After this, Patanjali takes up the various states of the mind in which control of the mind is possible. The first state is called as kshipta, ordinary thinking. The mind is simply running riot, there is absolutely no control over it. The second one is called mudha, when we are sleepy, when we are tired, or when you are actually sleeping, the mind is not functioning at all in the way it should function. The third stage is called vikshipta. Temporarily there is a little concentration, meditation, and most of the time it is out. That is our meditation. So 1 second concentration, 100 seconds distraction. So that is called vikshipta state. But above these 3 states, there are 2 more, ekagra and niruddha. In the ekagra state, there is absolute concentration. The same wave of the mind is constantly, continuously there, it is not giving rise to any other way of the mind. That is true concentration, ekagra avastha. Ekarupa vritti as it is called, and it is here that we get the sakshatkara of the dhyaya vastu. And the last stage is called niruddha, when all the vrittis are completely eliminated, resulting in what the Advaita Vedanta calls as nirvikalpa samadhi. Then Patanjali classifies the samprajñāta samadhi or samadhi got through ekagrata into 4 different groups. It's a very highly technical subject. We need not bother about it now. But there are other aspects of practical spiritual life which are very, very useful to us as sadhakas. There are certain things which are obstacles to yoga. Patanjali calls them as antarayas. Antarayati. Between me and the goal that I want to reach, they come. It's an obstacle which prevents me from reaching the final goal of life. So antaraya in effect simply means obstacle. Obstacles to the practice of yoga. And he has listed them as 9 in number. The first is called vyadhi, physical disease. All of us can understand very well, when the body is ill, it is impossible to think of God. It's a natural thing, and Patanjali also has given it the very first place. So if there is no health, if the body is ill, the mind cannot be controlled. So you have to cure the vyadhi, cure the disease by taking appropriate steps to regain your health. It goes without saying. One day, I went to Tyagishanji and asked him one question. That question was more or less connected with my physical system. Immediately he said, for physical problems, go to a doctor. For spiritual problems, come to me. So naturally that was his field in which he could help us. So the first obstacle is vyadhi. The second obstacle is dhyana. The mind becomes very lazy. It doesn't want to do what we want it to do. That is called dhyana. So we have to use our willpower a little and force it to do what we want it or expect it to do. Third is samshaya, doubt. Samshayatma vinashyati. The Lord says in the Gita, if you are constantly beset with doubts, you will never be able to reach the final goal of life. And in Vyasa Bhashya, he gives a number of alternatives, how doubts can assail our mind and completely destroy our peace. So samshaya has to be overcome by shraddha. Belief in the words of the Shastras, in the words of the Guru, and ultimately in your own conscience, and stick to it. Then comes pramada, heedlessness, carelessness. In the path of yoga, we have to be very, very vigilant. If eternal vigilance is the price of freedom, eternal vigilance is also the price of spiritual life. Pramadam vai mrutyamaham bravimi. The sage Sanat Kumar